Usually on this channel we talk about 8-bit computers in ancient programming languages, but today I have something a bit different. I've been very interested in some text-oriented games, modern text-oriented games, not old text adventure games, for the web. And I've played a number of quite interesting ones, but there is this one called Roadwarden that really got my attention and kind of inspired me to make my own game. Not really copying it, it's actually a very different thematic, but inspired by some of the user interface ideas and the gameplay ideas. So it took me a bit longer than I expected this project. I started it in early January and now we are in early April. I thought it was like a month-long project, but it took me about 3 months to get to a first prototype, not of the whole game, but a playable prototype of the first chapter of the game. So I would like to share with you a bit about the journey to get to this prototype and how it looks like. I'm using some AI generated art there's all sorts of interesting ideas I would like to share with you, and I would love to hear any feedback you might have about this. So without further ado, let's dive into the process. I really like this game called Roadwarden, and although it's a text-oriented game, it's not really a text adventure in the usual sense that you type commands. It's more about clicking than anything. But yeah, this screen is an example of the game. You have some text describing what's going on, and then you can choose some reactions, and yeah, it has RPG traits, like you have a character with some stats, and you have an inventory, and you have health. And what I would really like is the overall feel of the game, and the very clever use of this isometric art. It's a bit of pixel art. It reminds me of awesome CRPGs from the late 90s, early 2000s, things like Baldur's Gate, the first and the second one, and their sequels. I mean, like Icewind Dale and related games. And I felt like doing something like this, but with a bit of a different setting. And also I thought about using music and sounds more, with more presence. I think even without animations, and even with being basically a text-oriented game with some choices, something that you could actually run in an 8-bit computer like that Apple IIe over there, plus sound and some pixel art, I think it really could make a very interesting game. So I came up with some sort of design ideas how to do that. And my idea is quite simple, actually very similar to what Roadwarden does. So stealing some of the notions here, at least to get started, not about the game content or the game art or the game idea, but really about the mechanics of the interface. So I really like this idea that you have here on this side. You have like an image that, sorry for the horrible try. So on this side we have really an image area, and then we have here the text where we narrate what is happening in the game. So we have the text happening here, and then we would have, whenever you have to react, you would have your options in here. And finally, we would have on this side sort of the picture that represents your character, and here we would put some links. I don't know if this would be text or images, but that you have a link to the inventory or to the player stats and to settings and other stuff. So with that idea in mind, let's put together a very quick prototype. With that goal in mind, I have jotted down some prototyping code. So I created a new GitHub repository called Noir Game. I don't want to call the game Noir, but I mean it has a bit of a noir detective story setting, and I don't have a real good name right now. So I just started out with this name. And then I created an index HTML, which basically has those three sections. So we have, this is the main screen. And on this main screen, which starts hidden, and it only starts when you click Start Game button. And that happens because turns out that in certain browsers like Chrome, you cannot simply start playing audio before the user interacts somehow with the screen. So this Start Game, which I'll make nicer later, it's just a way that we get sound enabled. And this is this div here is where we get the real content of the main screen. So the main screen has a table, so we can distribute those three areas, right? The image area, which takes about 20% of the width of the screen, and then we have the text area that takes around 50%. It's sort of the main interaction part, and then we have that character and settings area that's sitting to the right, that contain it's using again another 20% of the, actually this should be 60%, right, to make sense. So yeah, this is just about sizing some of the image. So I have used some images, and because I'm terrible to draw characters, I'm actually using free AI tools like DALL-E to create those images, and I'm gonna show you later how I am doing that. And for audio, I'm taking stuff from Freesound, and I'm taking some public domain songs. I want to use a lot of jazz songs from the 1910s and 1920s, and you have a lot of public domain stuff that you can use. And also I intend at some point to mess with AI tools to create music. So let's see how that works. I'm sort of using these AI tools to compensate for the artwork skills that I lack. And of course, this is not enough to make a professional game, but this is not meant to be professional in any way. This is just something that I'm doing here for fun. So I have created this index HTML with these areas. And also I got from free fonts this font named Advanced Pixel 7, which I like. And by the way, I am of course adding to my README. I'm taking note of all these things that I'm using, all these bits and pieces that I'm taking, so I can properly attribute them later, which is quite important. And you see here that we point to our JavaScript, and here I have some really basic JavaScript going on. So I take the elements of the start screen and the main screen because I'm gonna use them. And then I have some sentences here, an array with sentences, which are basically the things I want to display. I don't want to just go out and display everything at once. I want to have a fade-in effect. This is also an idea that I saw in Roadwarden I liked. So when you start the game, right, when you click the start button and you call the start game function, then what I do is I hide the start screen, the one that had the start button, and I show the main screen, and then I play music, And here I'm using a Benny Carter song. Probably I'm not gonna use this because I don't think this is public domain, but I just happen to like this song a lot, and I will use it at least for starting playing with this. Later I will probably replace it with something that's free to use. And this ring sound we get it from Free Sound. So we start playing music, and here we have this play audio function. It's very simple function using the web audio API. So I just take some audio that I have downloaded and put here, and I play this audio, and I define also the gain. I don't want some of, or at least I want some of the sounds to be louder than others. So the next thing after I start playing music and showing the main screen, I also display the sentences fading in, and you can see those sentences. I pretty much I pass this array of sentences, and then for the sentences I just iterate through each one of them. And this is the interesting part. I am adding to the inner HTML of this text div. I'm adding elements of the type span, HTML span tags. So those will be the sentences, but I can give an individual ID, like sentence 1, sentence 2, sentence 3, and so on. They start completely transparent, so you cannot see them. And then I call this fade in function, which is here, which essentially loops increasing the opacity by 0.1 until we come to 1, which is fully opaque, so the text is very visible. We can remove this log here. This is something I used while I was testing it. So for each sentence, we add one by one, and then we wait 1 second between each sentence. And I also added some fancy things here that if I add a string that just contains P, that means that I start a new paragraph. And also if I start with the string with a play sound and then some resource, I can play sound here. So this is just to try out my example, because what I do is I show some sentences, and this is like a hard-boiled detective that he's in his office and he is waiting for a client, of course, and then there is a knock on the door. So this sounded like a very, noir detective fiction start to me. And let's see how this looks when we put it all together. So I'm running that example code using a local HTTP server, and when we point to the index HTML page, we get the start game button, of course, and then we click it, and then we get the game screen, and we have now the rain sound, and we have the jazz music, and we have the fading text, and we have the nice knocking sound. Yeah, so this is really the field that I am going for. So I logged in on DALL-E, and here we can give prompts to ask for the images that we want to create. So for instance, one of the things I want is this. So let's see what that happens when we put this prompt and we ask DALL-E to generate something, because that's going to be the this lady will be okay. So not follow our content policy. So let me change this a little bit. So perhaps this is a bit more prudish for DALL-E's purposes. of course, I did not expect anything hardcore, of course, but I want to get this vibe of these dime store novels, and that prompt, I hope it's getting me there. So, oh, this is very nice. You can see this really works for me. If we didn't like it, then of course we could keep asking to generate similar variations of this image, or we could just change our prompt until we get what we want. But I actually like this one very much. It's sort of, that's what I was hoping for. So I'll just download it to the images directory of this game, and we're gonna use it later. So this is just one example of how we can compensate for our lack of artistic talent when it comes to pictures and perhaps even music and other things by using this open source tools. Well, in this case, it's not open source, but it's a free tool for now. All right, so it has been a couple of days, and I have tinkered a little bit more with the game. So now we have situations where you can react somehow. You make a choice of how you want to react to that situation, and that takes you to another situation. So let's see an example. So this is what we already knew, right? But now, after the knock on the door, we have some options. So now you can make a choice. So let's ask who's there. And by the way, now when I hover this option, nothing happens, but I want to later put an animation when you're hovering the mouse over the options that the selection shows, so you understand that you can click here. So you see that now we have something happening as a result of our choice. Now let's keep making choices. Okay, so now you see we have something that starts to look a little bit more like a game. We still don't have any character properties, inventory, health status, anything like that. And that would be one of the next steps. But before we get there, let me show you the code that gives us the result that you have just seen. So the first thing we notice, we now have a new area, right? The options area, basically where we get the options that the user can take displayed, and that sits at the bottom of the character area. So I'm sorry, at the bottom of the story area. So we have the image area with a row span of 2. So that basically occupies an entire column to the left of the screen, and then the character area, also row span of 2, it occupies the entire right side of the screen. And in the middle, we have, with 60% of the width, we have half the page being used for the story area, and the bottom half being used by the options area. And I have now some function to display the options. So given an array of options, we basically show so yeah, this is like the header, right? What should I do? And then for each one of the options, we just display the option and make it clickable. And when you click, you call a function display card. So what is this function display card? I have introduced this notion of a card, and a card basically it's a step in the narrative. So I've used a similar concept in some previous games. For instance, the Santa Paravia port from BASIC to JavaScript used a similar concept. So for instance, when we start, I could have called these screens, but because it's just like a progression of things that happen, and sometimes you will be standing in the same screen, like logical screen and image and so on. I thought card was a word that better described the concept, but basically you have the start card, and the card has an image, right? That's what you display on the left side, and it has the story with the sentences that we show and some audio effects, and has the options. I want to extend this later with the possibility of having options that depend on some of the characters' statistics, or to have options that modify characteristics of the client. For instance, I'm sorry, of the player. We could have, for instance, a trait that indicates whether the character is confident or is cautious. And when you do things like just boldly going and opening the door, you bolster the confidence of the player. But if you do things like asking who's there or hiding, then you're kind of going more on the cautious side. And then later we can actually give some options or increase the odds of success of some options based on the traits of the character, which be a very RPG-ish thing to do. But anyway, you see that we have one card, and then, for instance, the options here, basically we have the text that should be displayed for the option, and when you click this text, what is the card that you are taken to? For instance, this takes you to a card called Start Client Enters, so it's part of the start, the whole start storyline, but it's the card where the client enters. And you see that here we have the image that we have generated using DALL-E, and then we have the steps of the story, and then we have new options. That this one doesn't do anything for now. I mean, there's no, when you click on it, nothing happens. But I'm gonna get there. So you see that right now, instead of just calling display sentences, we actually we start by hiding the start screen with the start button, and then showing the main screen, and then we play music same way we did before, and then you say I want to display a card, and the card that I want to display is the card start. And then display card will first clear the story and clear the options, so it's clear all the text, display the new image, right, the image in the card, then display the story sentence by sentence, and we wait until all the sentences have faded in, and then finally we display the options. So you see that we have here new functions to clear the options, and down there to clear the story, display sentences, now it's called display story, and then display image, and display options, which we have already seen. And basically when a character, when the player clicks on one of the options, which call display cards dot, and then the name of the card that we get pointed to, like this one, and then we call the display card, and basically this is the game loop, right? So right now there is no end condition because we are just beginning to write this, and I still have to introduce, as I mentioned, statistics of the player, and I also want an inventory system, and I also want to have some sort of map, because we are currently in one location, which is the office of the detective, but I want later the detective to be able to take his car and just drive to different parts of our fictional noir town. Again, I have made some improvements to the game, so let me show you what's new, and then we take a look at what that means code-wise. First, you don't see here the music or the animation of the text because I added a debug mode. I find that going over and over again through these screens and having to wait until the animation blinks is just too cumbersome. And also the sound, I mean, you just keep repeating on and on and on the whole day. It's a bit annoying. So, of course, I want to make the player able to disable the music if they want so. So, in terms of story, we do have some new dialogue here. And the interesting thing is that you see that as we progress, you kind of eliminate some of the dialogue that you have already gone through. So in this case, we are asking questions to the client. And when we do that, we don't want to keep asking the same questions again and again. And that required some special handling. So let's take a look at that. The first big change you're going to notice is the JSON describing the cards is gone from the main source file. I have moved it to a separate JSON file. It makes the maintenance of these different files tidier, and also I like that it makes it harder for you with just when you're running the developer tools on Chrome to look through the dialog options, right? So it's of course always possible that you get this, and I'm not trying to really protect it, but I think it's good to not make it too obvious. At least someone opens that developer screen by mistake and end up kind of spoiling what comes next. So we have now this structure separate, and I have introduced a new concept. That's a state that's part of the game object, and you see that I have some variables here, or some Boolean variables that basically have to do with dialogue choices during the starting scene. And now I have the notion of a precondition which must be satisfied in order for you to show that option, and also a post condition, which is basically some code that gets executed to change the game state once you select that option. So you see that we have in this case a question, what happened, which at the beginning is false because it hasn't been asked. And then we check whether that's true before showing the option. And then we have a post condition that basically sets this to true so it doesn't get displayed again. So that's basically what we have new, other than the new dialogue options. And yeah, I'll keep working on this. So it's a little bit later on the same day, and I introduced something new, which is an inventory system. So you see that there's a new button here called inventory. And so you see a pixelated briefcase, and inside of it we have a .38 pistol or revolver. And at the point where the client tells her story, you read a letter from her brother. And when you open the inventory now, you see this letter over there, and you can click it, and then you see an image of the letter, which you can see later. So let's take a look at how this is accomplished in the code. From a front-end standpoint, as you would expect, we now have a pop-up for the inventory, which is here. It has a table. So you have that suitcase image as a background image, and then we put together a table where we show the different objects, and here you have another dialog to show each individual object. And then we have the corresponding show and hide. So we have here a show inventory window, which actually does render the table showing the objects, and a hide inventory window, and then a show object and a hide object. And because now we have objects, I have created another JSON file. So we had the one for the cards, now we have one for the objects. And we have a description, the image, the thumbnail image, and later maybe that I add other stuff, and we have the name. And we store the inventory just as an array. And you can see that we start with the Banker Special handgun. That's the detective's handgun. But all the information we take from these cards here. So when building the inventory table, we just iterate through this array, and based on the name we fetch the different data, description, images, etc., which we use to render the front end. So now we have an inventory system. So it's been about a week since I reported progress for the last time, and I now have combat. Let's take a look at that. So the beginning is not different at all, right? But I don't want to show you this in debug mode. So just take the shortest path. Okay, so at the moment that we accept the job from the client, that's where we have the new stuff. So when I leave the office, I am confronted with a thug. Now, we can either try to hide or attack him. And because I want to show you combat, of course, we're going to attack him. And we have to decide whether we try to run away, or if we punch him, or if we shoot him. So let me start shooting him. So we have some sound effects, and here we see the results. So I'm using rules similar to Dungeons and Dragons, RPG rules for combat. So we have a attack roll to see whether we hit or miss, and then we have a damage roll to see how much the damage is. And we are using our pistol, our revolver code 38 Banker Special, the one we start the game with. Later we might be able to get some other guns. Also, I don't have this right now, but I want to introduce the number of bullets, the ammo that you have before reloading as being a factor. So if you shoot a certain number of times, you have to reload your gun, and during that round basically your enemy can cause you damage, but you cannot. So we can always try to shoot the enemy. And you see that right now we have the enemy with 80% health and we have 90%. And you also can see that now we have a health bar. So just keep, yeah, here he missed. So good for us. So right now it doesn't make much of a difference between the punch and shooting. I want to make this more interesting later. I also want to use our stats to influence how much damage we make, either with hand-to-hand combat or just shooting. But we keep basically attacking, and this is not going that well for us. But yeah, you should see the other guy. He is at 6% health. Okay, so now the gun is dead. So we have here 41% health, but they have gone to the big sleep. And now we hide the body. And then we end up in the garage. That's kind of the end of chapter 1. So I still want to make this better. Not only the things I mentioned about taking stats into account and the number of rounds that you have in a certain handgun, but I also want to integrate better the combat with the main text area, right? So I thought it would be nice to put the combat stats here, but I don't like it so much. So for instance, when you look at the case file is completely messed up. Of course, there's different ways we could handle this, but I want to play around with ideas where combat, although internally the calculation is kind of still the same, that we kind of just integrate better with the text nature of the game, that it doesn't feel like we are in a completely different mode when doing combat. But that's, I mean, you have to start up. You have to start at some point and then see what works and what doesn't. So I feel I can polish this, but yeah, at least we have combat. It's one of the elements I want this game to have. So now let's take a look at what the code looks like. So the first interesting thing I want to call your attention is that we do not have the CSS here anymore. I have moved this to a separate file. Yeah, that just makes it cleaner that we have our HTML. And as you can imagine, I have introduced a new panel where we were showing those combat messages, and I just called the console, and that's under the options area. And I have also introduced the health bar under the character picture. So if you go to the JavaScript code, I have a class now called enemy that describes an enemy with a certain number of hit points and a certain armor class and a certain weapon. And here we have a class called weapon, which has ammo, but that doesn't do anything right now. And then here we have the number of dice and the attack cap. So this is like you have something like this. You have like 2 dice and max 8 hit points per die. So this is what the dice and attack cap mean in this context. So you see that we have 1d6 weapon by default, and here we have actually the weapons as constant. So we have our fists, that's a 1d4 attack, and then we have the code 38, that's a 6d2. I'm sorry, that's a 2d8. And the place where we use this is actually in the cards. So I have added a card for combat. And also you see that now I have the notion of precondition on the story as well. So we only show the certain elements of the story on the main text pane if you satisfy certain conditions. And in this case, I mean, if the enemy has died, we show this. If both you and the enemy are alive, then you show this. And if you die, we show this thing. And then for the options, depends a bit on your stats, whether you are bold enough to attack, whether also in order to flee, I want to introduce the notion that you have to be cautious. So again, I want decisions that you make in the story that make you either bolder or cautious to affect your combat. But right now I'm not implementing this. These are just some hints in that direction, but that's still pending. And then when you say like punch or shoot, you call a function called combat, where you say whether the player or the enemy attacks first, because I want in some scenes that you get surprised by the enemy. And also which weapon are you using, whether fists or in this case the 38. And we have then this combat function which clears the console, and then we roll the attack roll to see whether the player or the enemy they hit or miss. And the attack roll here, you see that basically we are rolling a certain number of die, and if we roll more than the target armor class, basically it's a hit. So then the reason why I evaluate both of the player and the enemy attack roll before calculating the damage is because if both of you miss, both you and the enemy miss, then I keep rolling until either one of you hits, because otherwise it's very boring that you have turns and turns and turns and say, oh, your enemy has missed and you have missed as well. So that's why I did it this way. So eventually when either of you or both of you have hit, then we calculate the damage. Damage roll is very similar to the attack roll, of course. And then depending on the weapon, we write something and play a different sound. Then we inform how many damage points were inflicted and what is the current number of was the current health state, and so on. So and then we do the same for the enemy. Yeah, there's a lot of details here, but they are pretty obvious and well commented. So if you read this code, I hope it will make sense. And that's it. I have added some scenes that for when you die, which we haven't seen in our demo, but yeah, it's I actually had to make the enemy much harder and you very weak in order to test my death screen. I'm pretty sure it's going to come up in one of the future parts. So that's where I am right now, and I will record the next segment when we have something new. So it's been about a month since I last had chance to touch the game. It's been a crazy period in my day job. But now we have something new, and that's the ability of creating characters. You can see here that if I start the game with Sam Spade, that's the character we are used to. And I also have Carrie Cashin, which is Lady Detective, and the name comes from one of the first hard-boiled female detectives in literature. But now we can create our own character, so we can give it the name we want, and I still have to implement that you can choose the gender, and I can kind of distribute abilities here. I'll just for now put some more or less random values here so we can check if later we have these values. And this is what we already know. If we come here to the character statistics, we see that we have the abilities that we have chosen before. So next thing I have to do is adding now some behavior that depends on these statistics. And that's not the only novelty. We also have now map navigation. So you see that I have jumped several screens to the point where we are in the garage. And here, if I step in the car, now I have a map of the city, and I have two locations: the office, that's where we are, and the city park, which is the location that we should go to. And if we click here, that takes us to the city park and the beginning of chapter 2. So code-wise, let me show the map again. So code-wise, I will not show you because this looks pretty much like other things we have seen so far. So what happens here is that this is a bit like the inventory. I'm showing you an image, and imposed on this image I have a table, and I put in locations of this table I have these icons that you click, and then you are taken to a different card in the code. So we've seen tons of different functionality in the previous sessions that look pretty much like this, so I wrap this one here. Okay, so we're back with some extra goodies. Now I have more of a use for the stats that we have introduced for the character, so you can set all those statistics about the character, and now we have more of a use for them. So for instance, in this situation, when you are first confronted with the need to either immediately open the door for someone who's knocking at the door or to ask questions, you can say, okay, if I open the door, now you get points towards being bold and lose points towards being cautious. And the idea here is that if you are cautious, that you are better at evading danger, and if you are bold, you deal more damage in combat. If we go a few screens, so there's two things I want to show here. So first, now that we have taken the case, we really have an entry on the notebook for that for this mission. So this is working. It wasn't before, we just had a placeholder here. And also you see that we have an option of asking for more money if you have at least 5 for street smarts, and we do have 5, but if you had less than that, then you basically could not choose this option. So again, if you ask for more money, you become even bolder. Here I probably should put some sort of hover box that tells you that you are moving over to the bold end of the spectrum. It's hard to visualize because it's just a few decimal places. Anyway, you see here we do not have the option of trying to hide anymore, right? So if you are towards the cautious, at the middle, or at least a little bit toward the cautious end of the spectrum, you could try to evade the attack, but because you're bold, you can only attack. However, you now have some advantages by being bold. For instance, if you shoot here, you see that we have an extra attack roll because of our hand-eye coordination. So there's basically, it's a random extra points between 0 and your hand-eye coordination. So you could, if you had like 10 points of hand-eye coordination, you could deal up to 10 extra. Actually, you would have 10 extra points when doing the attack roll to see if the attack is going to land or not. And there's 1 hit point for boldness, you see. The bolder you are, the more damage you cause. Also, if I punch the goon, also I get some points from muscle. I have 5 muscle, so I can deal up to 5 additional hit points of damage because of that. So other than that, it's still the same game as we know, but you see that we have introduced now the notion that your character statistics change dialogue options, that they change how you behave in combat, and also that the choices that you make change your statistics. So let's take a look at the code to accomplish these things. So here we can see one example. When we are about to ask for more money, the precondition is that you have a certain amount of street smarts, and then there's this label that gets rendered on screen. And once you take that action, you increase the trait of boldness. So if we check here, there is this function now that increases a trait, and in case of traits that have an opposite trait, which is the case of boldness, and the opposite trait is being cautious, so it checks the opposite trait and also decreases it. So your actions might increase or decrease stats, and your stats influence on how you what options are available for you. Also in the combat area, I have added some modifiers. For instance, here in the attack row, we have some modifiers. If you have good hand-eye coordination, you get extra points. And in the damage row, if you are bold, or if you are using your fists, your muscle will add to the damage that you're dealing. And finally, to make the notebook thing work, I created this function called add to notebook. Basically is adding an entry to an array, and then we render that array as a series of mission entries on your notebook window. And certain choices in the game are going to add entries to the notebook, and later, of course, we need to remove some of these entries when we solve these steps in our story. So yeah, that's it for now. So we are back for what is the last step, at least in creating a first working prototype, right? So of course this is not the full game, and there's still many things I would like to fix, but I deem this to be complete enough to have all the core mechanics. So let's see what's new here. We have a new button that allows you to load a previous game. Of course, you can save it. So if we start a game, also something we can do now is change the volume of the music and the sound effects. And if we save this, it will actually be part of the saved game. So if I save here, we download a file. And then if we are back at the beginning and we have load the previous game, we can find our prior save game and load it, and we're gonna be there. So in this case, it was just the first screen anyway, but I'm gonna show you an example where we load another prior save game where you end up in a very different point. So that was not a good example. This one. Yeah, you see that in this case we end up in the middle of the story. So that's one example of saving a game and then loading it later. And as I already showed you, that we have now the ability to change volume. So basically, to change the volume, I have separate gain nodes for the sound effects and for the music, and I allow you to change this and make it part of the game state. And for saving and loading the game, I actually just take the object that we use to represent the entire game. Right, so let me show you this. So this is the code that I mean. This game class contains pretty much all the state of our game, and now including music volume and sound effects volume, and also the version. because this way this gets saved, and later if we want to restart the game and we see that this game comes from a prior version and we have to add some more attributes here, we can do it. So, and also we have a pointer to the player itself, and what we have here, it's a save game file where we just take this game structure and turn it into a JSON file, and the load save game file does it the other way around. We initialize a new game based on a new player and a new game based on the JSON content. Of course, the file that you download as a save game right now, it's just a text file, so a JSON file, so you could go there and change things and influence the content of your game. But for now, this is good, can be even useful for development. Of course, if we keep polishing the game, we should make this into a binary payload, so it's not that easy for someone to change it, to tamper with the save game file. Okay, so this is the game so far. As I mentioned, this is not a complete game, but just a first prototype, and I would love to hear any reactions, comments, feedbacks you might have on how this turned out, about some of the choices that I've made, how you would make this game more interesting, more fun. Feel free to drop me a message. I would love to hear from you. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and see you next time.